So, how are things? Alright, I'm going to take a look at what I would consider to be a Doctor Who oddity. These are little bits of Doctor Who, generally non-canon, and just kind of weird little things that kind of, yeah, that happened. Some examples of this would actually include the Doctor Who movies starring Peter Cushing, the animated short Scream of the Shalka. I'd actually throw in the animated things like Dreamland and The Infinite Quest. But today we're going to talk about The Curse of the Fatal Death. So, this was a Children in Need special. Now, if you watch Doctor Who, you may be familiar with the Children in Need special. Doctor Who has done quite a few since coming back. The thing is, though, this was done while Doctor Who was off the air. I should have checked the exact year, but this was done in the 90s. So, Doctor Who went off the air originally in 89. It had the TV movie in 96. I do believe this was actually done after that, because they refer to the Doctor that we start out with as the 9th Doctor, which means the 8th already happened. Okay, so it's 96 or later. And then the show didn't come back proper until 2005. So what this is a spoof. It is having fun at what was, at that point, all of Doctor Who, what we would now consider to be classic Doctor Who. Poking a bit of fun, gentle nudging, loving mockery. Written by Steven Moffat. Yeah, that's Steven Moffat. Which makes it all the stranger as a thing unto itself. This was an odd thing. Well, I mean, it's an odd thing in the first place. But this was an odd thing for me to go and watch again. And I say again because I've watched it before, largely because I'd heard so many great things about it. And I remember watching it for the first time and going, why do people like this so much? And watching it a second time, I kind of still feel that. Now, I am going to grant that there is probably a fair amount of this humor that would have landed better at the time it aired, with Doctor Who not having come back yet, none of the shifts, and because, I mean, remember, while I am continuing to work on filling in my gaps on Classic Who, I came into Doctor Who during the modern era. My initial hook-in was Tennant, and then I started with Eccleston, so the entire perspective with which I'm coming at this thing is, strictly speaking, the wrong perspective, because it was written for an audience that knew Classic Who, and at the time it aired, that's all there was. That and like novelizations and the occasional comic and whatnot. So the natural perspective that I have is not the one that was intended for the audience to have. But I also can't help that. So nowadays, the Doctor Who Children in Need specials run 5-6 minutes, ballpark. This thing's 22. It's actually broken into 2 parts. It has a part 1 and a part 2 and a recap midway through. So this is actually fairly lengthy. And it's got a kind of impressive cast as it goes along as well. I am going to be breaking this thing down as it goes, so if you haven't seen it yet, pause this, look up Curse of the Fatal Death. It's for free, available on YouTube, like officially on the Doctor Who channel and on Children in Need's channel. So watch it and come on back, because otherwise I'm just going to start talking jokes, and, you know, there you go. And that's kind of the big thing. Most of the jokes don't land for me. I think some of it's just because some of the humor is really juvenile. Some of the humor really amounts to farts, poop, breasts. And you gotta do better than that. I'm not saying that there are not or can't be good jokes about farts or poop or breasts. But when the punchline is just fart, poop, breast, which it is in the cases where that is the core of the joke, they're not making a joke about those things. That's the punchline. No, I'm not going to laugh at that. I've been called a comedy snob more than a few times by friends of mine. So if you want to call me that too, you won't be the first. You'll be in very good company. So it kind of gets me off on the wrong foot right off the bat. That said, the performance of the most gusto performance in this is not of the Doctor. It is of the Master, played here by Jonathan Pryce. And Jonathan Pryce very clearly doing the Anthony Ainley Master. I mean, he's got the goatee, which actually was the only way the Master had been depicted when he wasn't burnt to a crisp up to that point. But, he is really just hamming it up. And he's really sinking his teeth into this. And that helps. It doesn't, when the jokes don't land, the jokes don't land. But the man's committed. And that certainly works. The initial Doctor we get is Rowan Atkinson, which is not as funny as you'd think it is. Like, once the initial kind of, hey, Dr. Bean's the Doctor, wears off, he plays it very straight, honestly. There isn't a lot of inherent humor in his portion of the thing. Some of the... okay. I've sort of been complaining a little bit. Here's some of the stuff that does work. I like, for lack of a better term, the timey-wimey jokes. They go on a little too much. Actually, I think each of them go on for at least one beat too long. But the idea of, like, the Doctor and the Master trying to one-up each other because they go to meet at this castle, and the setup is they each went back in time to bribe the architect to, like, set up a trap or something, but each of them is like, oh, well, I knew you'd do that, so I went even earlier, and I bribed the architect before you, and, I kind of like that. I like the use of time travel for that. Similarly, when the Master gets knocked into the sewers, unfortunately, some of that does feed into the poop humor, but I like the idea of he falls in the sewers, and he pops, and we see him show up again, like a few seconds later, and he is significantly older because it takes him hundreds of years to crawl through the sewers and get out again. And then he keeps getting knocked down into the thing and coming out older and older and older. That's a decent joke. So there are some. For me, most of the best jokes are a bit more on the subtle side. Like, at the very opening, we start with the Master in his TARDIS, and we also see the Doctor in his. What makes me laugh about that is the central part of the console, the bit that goes up and down, it's going like this. It's so unhinged. And, like, there were times in Classic Who where, like, the thing didn't go perfectly straight up and down. But, like, this is ridiculous how much and nobody draws attention to it. It just is. Like, that's a good joke. The Doctor and his companion, they run down the exact same chunk of corridor 3 times. I liked that until she felt the need to point it out. I actually liked it better before they said anything. I actually thought, hey, they didn't even have to say it. It's that, they just said it. But up until they said it, like, I did enjoy that joke. The Daleks showing up are actual legit Daleks. That works quite well. So, that lends a bit of authenticity. And honestly, the production values are no worse than latter-day classic era Doctor Who anyways. So, that works pretty well. The best joke by far, because I think it's one of the better jokes in general, and it's delivered the best, is in the second half of the thing, and it's a recurring joke of, I'll explain later. So, the companion asks, why do the Daleks never just exterminate you? Why do they always capture you? I'll explain later. That'll help the Daleks take over the universe. How will it do that? I'll explain later. I love that, because that's the kind of hand-wavy thing that Doctor Who has a tendency to do then and now. And I like that it's just done. They don't highlight it. They don't go like, hey, are you ever going to actually explain it? Are you just going to brush me off by saying, I'll explain later? No, they just do it. Let the joke stand on its own. And it's a good joke. So that's one of the better ones. And like I said, that one does recur. And then we start getting into the regeneration gags, which is that things keep happening that cause the Doctor to regenerate. So initially, we go from Rowan Atkinson to Richard E. Grant. Now, Richard E. Grant, he is enjoyable largely because of how sharp of contrast he was. Rowan Atkinson, as I said, actually playing the part pretty straight. About the only thing that was off was how flat out romantic and like saying he's going to marry his companion, which I'm going to guess was probably a dig at the movie with Paul McGann, which would have had the first on-screen kiss between the Doctor and companion, and fans hated that. So that's probably what that was a dig at. But having Richard E. Grant show up and, be, kind of slick and kind of cool, but also a little sleazy, a little into, like he sees a mirror and licks his reflection, like, oh, okay. Like, too much of him wouldn't have worked, but like, the sharp contrast from what it was when it was Atkinson to that works pretty well. And then he goes back to rewire something, and there's a small explosion. He comes out, and now it's Jim Broadbent. And again, the sharpness of the contrast is quite lovely. In addition to the fact that it's just so exaggerated how like, oh goodness, oh, you're my fiance. Oh, I'm rather shy around girls now. Like, again, dragged out much longer than it was, wouldn't have worked. But because the regeneration jokes are basically coming one right after the other and not lingering too long, the way that some of the earlier jokes did. I hate to go on about the fart jokes, the fart joke does actually eventually pay off. Like, they did build off it for later on, but I still feel like both times it came up, both the initial setup in the beginning and then later paying off with the Master and the Doctor communicating to him through the smell of his farts, I still think that joke goes on too long. The regeneration jokes don't really outstay their welcome. So after Broadbent, we get Hugh Grant, which I took that joke to be nobody this big would ever play this part, because in the late 90s, Hugh Grant was huge. Because as far as characterization goes, he's not that far off from the other ones that we saw up to that point. A little more what was considered dashingly handsome at the time, but that's kind of it. Then we get to the final surprise regeneration of the Doctor as a woman, which probably played pretty well as a joke at the time. In hindsight, not so much. And I don't just mean that because the Doctor is now a woman. I mean because if you actually examine that joke and why it's supposed to be funny, that's only a joke if the very core notion of the Doctor ever being a woman is inherently funny, i.e. inherently wrong. And I'm not, shaking my finger at Moffat for that. Certainly at the time it was made, that was kind of the general consensus opinion. And I'm not even necessarily going to hold that Moffat continued to have that opinion since then. But what I am going to say is it's something, knowing the basis of that joke and seeing what Doctor Who fandom has been like in the last few years, I, for one, am not really comfortable laughing at that now. If I ever was. Beyond the fact that she actually, and this kind of makes the problem worse, Joanna Lumley as the Doctor only really has one or two proper jokes in the beginning, and one's about her breasts, and the other's about a vibrator. And after that, she actually doesn't have any jokes. She's just, the female Doctor isn't that funny. And so, aside from the uncomfortableness, I just don't think it's very funny. After the sonic screwdriver as vibrator joke, they stopped bothering giving her jokes. She's just standing there, being a woman Doctor. And apparently that's supposed to be enough to be funny. It's not. But she's game for it. She gives it a go, as all the performers do. Even though, like I said, Jonathan Pryce completely chews the scenery in the best way. Oh, that was another really good line with Richard E. Grant when he turns, sees the Master. You're the camp one! And the Master, I am not camp. It's pretty amusing. Like I said, there's little bits and pieces that are funny, but like, part of me wants to go at this thing with a hacksaw, trim it down to about 5 to 6 minutes, and either like trim out some of the jokes that went on too long, trim out the jokes that flat out don't work, and make this a really tight little thing around the jokes that actually do work, because they are here. And like I said, I think you get maximum 8 minutes out of that. But because they went for the full 22, not all the jokes work, at least not for me. Some of them go on too long. You know, I had hoped I'd find more out of it this time. Because again, like I said, I remember seeing it for the first time years ago and thinking, nah, that feels like very scraping the barrel, very obvious jokes to be making for the most part. Because I think that's why I prefer like the joke about the Doctor and the Master one-upping each other, going back in time over and over again. Or the joke about I'll explain later. Because those are jokes you really can only make about Doctor Who. They are based off an understanding of the property. Ha-ha farts, ha-ha poop, ha-ha boobs. You could make those jokes about anything. I mean, those jokes structurally could be applied to any parody of anything. There's nothing uniquely Doctor Who about them. They're just generic, cheap punchlines slapped onto a Doctor Who spoof. So this thing is at its best when it is properly lampooning the unique qualities of Doctor Who. It's just not always doing that. So that's my thought on The Curse of the Fatal Death. I have a feeling that this review is not going to be well received because I can't think of anybody talking about that thing where I haven't gotten the impression that they were talking about that with great affection. This will be lots of fun. Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. If you wish to support me, I've got a Patreon. Helps pay my bills. Additionally, there's other stuff below. There's, my P.O. box and socials and so forth. So go on ahead and check them out. Leave a comment, as I said. But also, you don't have to do any of that. I greatly appreciate it. But at the end of the day, folks, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. Please don't hurt me. And until next time, this council is adjourned.